At break of day, there is no fear. The sun is high, the sky is clear. But as we see the shadows grow, the last moments of sunset glow, we grow so cold with loss of light, and it's time to tremble because it's Fright Night. Hello, my name is Scully. I'd like to say in the flesh, but you see, I don't really have any flesh to speak of. Isn't that right, Moldy, my love? Moldy is my darling wife. Moldy doesn't say much. She lost her tongue somewhere along the way, and she doesn't go very far. The chains on her arms and legs probably have something to do with that. She lets me do as I please. Of course, she really has no choice. Are you ready to give blood?
Yeah, sure. You pay cash, right?
Oh, you will be compensated for your trouble.
Okay, great.
I feel a slight sting. The story you're about to hear is really very sad. You've heard of a self-made man? Well, this is about a man-made man. But they left a few things out. Poor thing. Ugly, no charm, not much fun to be around, a horrible temper. A real case for a personality transplant. No, I'm not talking about the school principal. I'm talking about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. What follows is a document discovered in a barrel that was recovered by the American whaling vessel Morgan as it patrolled the North Atlantic ice pack in search of whale oil. The crew of the vessel spotted this barrel floating and brought it aboard to satisfy their curiosity as to why a barrel would be found along the edge of the ice pack at a time of year when the predominating currents are running south,
away from the ice pack. The sailors feared that there was a foreign ship whaling the same area as they, and were afraid of the threat that it posed to their livelihood. When the barrel was recovered, it was found to have been sealed with great care with tallow and oil, both of which are relatively impervious to the frigid northern climates, and bore the stamp of a German supplier. German whalers had never been heard of in these parts before, and the fact that the barrel had been obviously sealed aroused the curiosity of the crew, and they opened it to discover the contents. The contents of the barrel stunned the crew. It was a diary in German, the cargo manifest, and the ship's log from the ship Bavaria. Though nobody on board spoke German fluently, it was possible to determine that something had gone terribly wrong during its crossing from Hamburg to New York, and that it ended up heading north into the ice pack. What made this especially interesting was that the last entries of the log and diary, though a few months apart, were written over 40 years ago. The contents of the barrel were brought back to America after the Morgan finished her cruise. Initially, the log and diary were to be given over to whatever company owned the ship. Back to America after the Morgan finished her cruise. Initially, the log and diary were to be given over to whatever company owned the ship, but it was found to have gone out of business some 20 years ago. Later, the documents were turned over to the American Scientific Survey. After a few weeks of translating the documents, the survey translator decided that the contents were more of a biological than a geographical nature, and the documents made their way to my desk. After reading the documents, I found them to tell a tale too wild to be possible. If it were not for the extremely odd nature in which the documents were recovered, I would have dismissed them as pure fiction. Instead, I slowly began researching the accuracy of the documents between my numerous other projects. The more I investigated the information contained in the documents, the more it supported the contention that there was a great amount of truth in the tale. For example, the Bavaria did sail from Hamburg over 40 years ago and never did make it to New York. Until the barrel was discovered, it was assumed lost with all hands. The weather described in the Bavaria's logs are corroborated by the logs of other ships in the same area of the ocean at the same time as the Bavaria. After several letters to Germany, I was able to get a passenger list, crew list, and cargo manifest from the Hamburg Harbor Authority archives. There was a Victor Frankenstein listed on board, and the number of passengers, as well as a few of the names mentioned in Dr. Frankenstein's writings, are corroborated by the list. I was also told that a lifeboat from the Bavaria was discovered capsized and empty along the coast of Newfoundland about 6 months after the ship had reported missing. Further investigation showed that Dr. Frankenstein did leave his home country for America shortly after his family castle had burned down. He did attend the Royal College of Medicine, where he was recalled to be brilliant but full of strange ideas. The records the Academy of Physicians show that he was in attendance at the Vienna conference, but several pages describing the event were stricken from the record at a later date. Nobody was available to explain why. So I leave it to the reader to determine for himself how much faith should be placed in the writings that follow. As I have stated earlier, the story is almost too fantastic to believe, yet there is enough truth in the matter to leave one with legitimate questions. It is my belief that as science advances, the theories and discoveries that Dr. Frankenstein describes will ultimately be proven or disproven. The Last Testament of Dr. Victor Frankenstein. My food supplies are all but exhausted, and I am nearly out of wood for the stove, so I cannot keep the Arctic cold at bay much longer. I am resolved, therefore, to write this document and place the relevant diary entries in a sealed barrel and cast them into the ice floe, which is holding the ship hostage, and hope that they will be recovered and taken to the proper authorities. The knowledge contained in these entries may be used for good or ill, but I fear that losing them may be a vital loss for mankind. May God forgive me for what I have done. Victor Frankenstein. As far back as medical school, I was obsessed with the question, what is life? We all knew when something was alive or dead, but what had to happen to a being to move him from one state to another? True, we all know how to kill someone, but what really happened to them when they died? More importantly, what happened to something when it came to life? A seed or a child in the womb. What happened to them when they became alive? We would often sit in the beer gardens of Vienna after classes that ended and argued until the early hours about the true nature of life. I constantly argued that if we could isolate the element that separated life from death, we could use it to create life within the laboratory. Oh, did this cause an uproar amongst my classmates and teachers, as this was no longer an issue of science, but one of ethics or of playing God. Nobody seems to be at all disturbed by mankind's power to take a life, but the idea of giving mankind the power to give life scares people. I see no reason to fear this idea, however. What is so wrong about restoring the life of a virtuous person that had died well before their time? Eventually, I finished school and was content to work as a doctor in the village near the family castle. My father was the ruler of a small principality in Bavaria, and looked at my medical leanings with some measure of distaste. He wanted me to study law, and to become an accomplished statesman, so I could rule our holdings, and maybe marry advantageously and even expand our realm. Still, in spite of our differences, we were very close, and spent a lot of time together, especially as he got on in age. I am sorry to say that when he finally passed away, I was really not prepared to become a public figure. My love was science, and I found myself drawn to the laboratory rather than the town hall. I loved the solitude of the laboratory I built in the north tower of the castle, and let the regents manage the day-to-day affairs of my holdings. As I avoided an extravagant lifestyle, I was able to divert our tax revenues into my research instead of banquets. My father's passing brought my mind back to the question of my youth. Again, I wondered about what makes a living creature alive. What is the missing ingredient that is required to bring life to an object? I began reading every journal article published about the nature of life and death, and also managed to carry out a few experiments of my own on both live and dead animals. Occasionally, I would buy the body of a freshly hung criminal and perform long and detailed autopsies in an attempt to discover the nature of death. Gradually, I began to believe that the missing ingredient was electricity. I read of the experiments where a current would be passed through the legs of a dead frog, and they would jump. The idea that the brain communicates to the rest of the body via electrical impulses intrigued me, and I gradually began to believe that a correctly timed and placed electrical charge could reanimate dead flesh.
It's a lovely evening, isn't it? A perfect night for a little story. Maybe something to lull you into a sleep.
So then you can have
So
horror
then you
night.
can have
My early experiments were unsuccessful, but I did learn that I would need to provide an absolutely massive charge to obtain the desired effect. I found that it took almost all of the charge I could generate with my hand generator just to get a frog's legs to twitch. I also managed to get a human heart to begin beating again, using a much larger charge than even the frog's legs required. If I could determine a way of running such a charge through a being that I wished to revive, I believed success might be possible. The answer came to me, obviously enough, during a thunderstorm. If I could harness the power of one stroke of lightning, that would certainly provide enough current necessary to return life to once dead tissue. The question then became one of controlling the charge and reducing it to a less destructive level. I have seen during my years of medical practice the effects of lightning strikes on villagers and cattle, and know full well that it is lethal. It struck me as ironic that a force so lethal could end up being the force that could give life. I studied this problem for several years. During this time, I became more comfortable in my role as a nobleman and became less reclusive. I still spent most of my hours working in the laboratory, but I also began to become more visible by traveling amongst the farmers and villagers, speaking with them, hearing their grievances, and occasionally treating some peasant's illness or injury that I happened to run across in my journeys. Several times a year I would journey to Vienna or Munich to attend conferences held by scholars and doctors to share what they had learned in their research. These trips afforded me a pleasant opportunity to meet with my peers and to exchange ideas, and with several of my colleagues, reminisce about our years together studying medicine. I was truly at peace with the world at this point in my life. Then, 3 things happened that altered my life forever. I fell in love, I met Dr. Lazarus, and my best friend lost his arm in a riding accident. During my trips to Vienna, I was introduced to a beautiful young lady who was the daughter of one of the greatest physicians in Austria. Until I met Anna Strauss, I had not believed in that silly romantic notion of love at first sight. Happily, that meeting confirmed that notion for both of us. We sat in the ballroom of the hotel while the other attendees of the conference danced around us, telling each other of ourselves and our scientific interests. It was very obvious that her father taught her well, as she was able to follow my arguments, no matter how technical or complex they became. I must have let my guard down as the evening wore on, as I mentioned my interest in reviving dead flesh. Over the last few years, I had kept my research secret, simply because I recalled all of the bitter arguments of my school days, and the prevailing superstitions amongst my subjects regarding death and the dead. Finally, I feared my colleagues would view me as immoral or as a charlatan. And soon, as I let slip my secret, I was certain that she would leave our table and refuse to speak with me ever again. Much to my surprise, the opposite happened. She grew fascinated and questioned me for a long time about the nature of my research. She only mentioned morality once, stating that science is above morality. The quest for knowledge is always moral. In the light of what has since happened, I fear I can no longer agree. As the ball ended, we parted, but agreed to meet the next day. Just before she rejoined her father, she added that there was a gentleman she desired that I become acquainted with. She would send word to him, and if I was willing, she would arrange a meeting. The promised meeting occurred only 2 days later. Anna had me picked up in her carriage and taken to one of the sanitariums on the outskirts of town. We entered through a low door on the far side of the main gate and proceeded through a long, narrow corridor until we reached a solitary door set inconspicuously in the side of the passage. She knocked and walked in. The room we entered was obviously a laboratory, but showed signs of neglect and exceptional disorder. The room was lit only by a few lamps, which illuminated huge piles of papers and documents in what I perceived as complete disorder. Test tubes, beakers, and other chemistry equipment lay about the space, some filled with fluids of various hues or powders of some unknown nature. Along one wall was a huge collection of specimen jars, filled with various organs and tissue samples which I guessed were collected over years of research. Anna called out, and a moment later a small, smiling gentleman emerged from a back room of the laboratory. "Ah, Anna, how good to see you again. How long has it been? I trust your father is well?" "Yes, doctor, all is well. As you can see, I brought Dr. Frankenstein with me. Victor, I wish you to meet Dr. Lazarus." Dr. Lazarus laughed. "Anna has told me that you too are interested in the possibility of returning life to the dead. I have been researching along those lines for years myself. I suspect that my name has cursed me to a pursuit of trying to raise the dead." Dr. Lazarus was the physician at the sanitarium, treating the illnesses of the inmates and using their cadavers for research when his remedies failed. The job offered him the ideal situation to carry out his research, as he was provided with a private laboratory and a regular supply of subjects. What followed was one of the most fascinating weeks of my life. Dr. Lazarus, Anna, and I discussed all sorts of theories, ideas, and beliefs about what would be necessary to bring a being back to life. Dr. Lazarus, I found, had also concluded that electricity was probably the final step in restoring life to dead tissue, and had developed an electrolyte bath that was capable of distributing a small electrical current to whatever was placed within the bath. I have been able to restore normal cellular activity to small tissue samples within the bath for several hours at a time, but the sample dies within a few minutes of removing it from the bath. Though I believe that this is a major step in the right direction, it would take something far more radical to bring an entire complex organism back to life. Do you think increasing the current would have any effect? I asked. Perhaps as a final step. First, we would need to have the cells within the body functioning, and then a large current to jolt the organs to life. The biggest problem would be how to distribute the current evenly, and where to obtain such a charge. The generators on hand are capable of only a small current. I have thought of using lightning as a power source. Ah, Dr. Lazarus smiled. If you can keep the current from killing everything within the bath, you may have a solution. There would be major problems to be solved in the formula for an electrolyte bath that could distribute that kind of current properly, and major engineering problems in collecting, storing, and controlling the electricity in the lightning strike. Looking to have lightning strike near you is dangerous enough. Still, I think you are on the right path. I returned to my castle and resumed my research, fired by the knowledge I had gained from my discussions with Dr. Lazarus. Anna and I wrote to each other every day, telling of our everyday routines and planning our next meeting. She wrote to me from Berlin, where her father was attending yet another conference. While there, she met and apparently quizzed mercilessly a scientist working on electricity. She wrote that he was developing ways of controlling the amount of current flowing from one region to another, and she had requested that he send me a description of his work, that I might learn how I could control the flow of charge from the lightning into the electrolyte bath. Some weeks later, Dr. Lazarus wrote and told me of a new bath he had developed. With it, he was able to bring even larger tissue samples back to life, and have them survive for several hours. He felt that with a little luck and a lot of patience, one day, he would be able to try reviving something as large as a cat. He concluded his letter by saying, "It will still be many years before we could ever try something as large as a human, as that will require several more scientific breakthroughs." The months passed. Anna and I had gotten engaged and were planning on a wedding the following year. I had gradually built a device that could control current, but had yet to try it on a lightning bolt. Using the electrolyte bath designed by Dr. Lazarus, I too was able to reanimate small pieces of tissue. I found that by soaking the tissue for a long period before inducing current, I was able to restore cellular activity in larger and larger tissue samples. At one point, I placed a recently dead mouse into the bath, and after several hours was able to restore cellular activity in most of the body. I wouldn't call the mouse alive, however, as there was no sign of brain activity, a pulse, or any coordinated activity within the body. For life to be fully restored to a being, we had to discover a way of restoring large-scale functioning within the body. Still, I firmly believed that we were on the right track. One afternoon, I decided to take the rest of the day off of my studies and enjoy the crisp fall weather. I changed into my riding gear, and took one of my horses out for a ride through the woods. Just as I turned out of the castle gate, I saw a lone horseman emerge from the woods. He waved, so I reined in to allow them to approach. It was my friend Carl, whom I had not seen in years. He was traveling to Munich and decided to take a detour to stop and visit me. We rode for most of the afternoon and talked of many things. I told him of Anna, and he told me of his plans to go to America. He explained that as he was the youngest brother in his family, his inheritance would be the smallest. He felt that it would be best to take what money he did possess and move to a land where there were more opportunities for young, hard-working men. Oh, I joked. You still think yourself young. Younger and stronger than you, old man, and he took off at a gallop. I, of course, was not to be outdone, and immediately gave pursuit. We drove our horses across the fields towards the castle, and were almost to the gate, when his horse fell beneath him. They went down together, and by the time I got to Carl, he was unconscious, with his left arm hanging at some grotesque angle from his side. With the help of several servants, I was able to get him into my laboratory, where I could operate on his arm. As soon as I had a chance to examine the wound, it was obvious that the limb would have to come off. The bones beneath the elbow were shattered beyond repair. Since Carl was unconscious, the operation was simple, and it was only a few minutes before I closed the wound. I wrapped the amputated limb in gauze and placed it in a large jar filled with some old electrolyte solution that I intended to dispose of. I spent the next few days caring for Carl. He was saddened by the loss of his arm, but as he was right-handed, he figured learning to live with this loss wouldn't be too difficult. One evening, after Carl went to sleep, I returned to the laboratory to clean up after the amputation. As I finished, I looked at the jar containing the arm. Did I see motion? I ran to the jar and pulled the arm from it. Unwrapping the arm, I looked closely. It was still pink, not the pale gray one usually expects. There were definitely signs that the limb was alive. So I decided to place it in the fresh electrolyte bath and run a small current into it. As there was no obvious change, I decided to go to bed and wait to see what would have happened by morning. The excitement kept me awake, and as I lay there, I became aware of a low rumbling in the distance. There was a storm moving in. I resolved to test the lightning collection system I had built. Perhaps I could make the breakthrough that Dr. Lazarus and I had always spoke of.
Well, this evil potion is coming along fine, don't you think, Broomstick? I think something like that could do wonders for me, don't you? Now, where's my cookbook? Curses, I'm fresh out of buzzard's teeth. Oh well, I'll just have to put that on my shopping list, with the goat's toes and the eye of bat.
I ran down to the lab in my nightclothes and connected the bath to my lightning collection system. I turned the crank, which raised a long metal rod high into the air above the tower, so that if lightning were to strike anywhere in the vicinity, it would hit the rod, sending the current down into the tank. The storm steadily moved closer, and I could count the time between the lightning flash and the crash of the thunder. At first, it was 2 miles off, then a mile, and finally it sounded to be right on top of me. Suddenly, there was a deafening crack. Blue sparks flew from almost every point in the lab at once, and I was plunged into darkness. After a few minutes of groping around, I was able to relight a lantern and look about the room. The lightning strike had caused some damage to the collection system, but everything appeared to be more or less functional. I made my way over to the bath to look at the arm. It was floating on the surface, moving gently with the ripples in the tank. After looking for a moment, however, I realized that it was the motion of the arm, gently flexing and unflexing, that was causing the ripples in the tank, and not the other way around. I reached into the tank and gently touched the palm of the hand as it unflexed, and the reaction was almost instantaneous. The hand grabbed me and held on fiercely. It was only by prying the fingers open one by one that I was able to free myself. I was both terrified and elated. I had done it. The arm was alive. Over the next few weeks, I did nothing but care for Carl and wait for the next storm. When another storm rolled through, I managed to get a sheep heart to beat. I now felt ready to try something bigger, and I started secretly contacting local grave diggers to alert me to any recent burials. I realized that anything that I tried to reanimate would have to be recently deceased. Also, as I did not know when another storm would pass through, I had bodies delivered to the castle as often as possible, so that if a storm came, I would be prepared. Unfortunately, I had no control over what body would be available when the storm did arrive, and this was to have disastrous consequences. One afternoon, 2 gravediggers brought a coffin to the castle. One of my trusted servants discreetly paid them off, and had the body brought to the lab, where it was unpacked and placed in the bath to allow the electrolyte solution to soak into the body. We were lucky, for within a few hours a storm could be seen moving in from the mountains. I rushed to the lab to make sure that all was ready. The storm hit just as night fell, and this was to have disastrous consequences. One afternoon, 2 gravediggers brought a coffin to the castle. One of my trusted servants discreetly paid them off, and had the body brought to the lab, where it was unpacked and placed in the bath to allow the electrolyte solution to soak into the body. We were lucky, for within a few hours, I looked in the tank to see what we had accomplished. The body had its eyes open, and it looked back at me with an expression of horror. He tried to speak, but nothing but a strange gargling noise came out. "Get him out of the bath, quickly! He might be drowning." We pulled him out of the bath and laid him over the operating table, face down to drain the electrolyte fluids from his lungs. It was then that I noticed the cuts and abrasions on his neck. This man had died by hanging. We had restored to life a dangerous criminal. Still, I was not about to destroy what I had spent so long to create. I would be able to keep him under control, somehow. After we cleared his lungs, he lay there breathing deeply, but was still obviously terrified. Again, he tried to talk, but this time his voice was little more than a croak. I imagined that being hung had destroyed his vocal cords. He hardly moved while he lay there, but simply turned his head to watch us as we worked around him. We offered him food, but he did not respond, so we left it near him should he want it. Over the next few days, he began to regain motor control and some higher functions. He would eat, and occasionally try and move about the room. After about a week, he could walk very slowly. It was as if he was learning to walk all over again. His speech, too, was still in a harsh, croaking sound, and he could only form a few words at first. I would ask him who he was, but though I think he could comprehend the question, he was unable to recall. In another month, he regained most of his motor control, his appetite was better, and he could communicate on a very simple level. It was like speaking to a child. He treated me as if I were his father, and something resembling affection developed between us. Still, I could tell that on another level, he resented me for bringing him back from the dead. He was very easily scared of bright lights, fire, and loud noise. One time I dropped a tray with metal implements on it, and the resulting noise seemed to drive him mad. He thrashed about the lab, smashing equipment as his arms flailed about. It took 4 of us to subdue him. Apparently, as with the arm, our reanimating process gives the subject great strength. After that incident, we did our best to keep him isolated from anything that might trigger another outburst. I made a critical error a few weeks later and decided to spend a week with Anna in Munich. While I was away, another huge storm hit the castle and terrified our subject. He went berserk, and when my servants tried to control him, he killed one and wounded another before escaping into the night. A rider summoned me home to try and take control of the situation, but it was too late. I heard tales of the executed criminal returning from the dead and taking his revenge on several men that had figured into his death sentence. They had been found with their necks broken. Very soon, stories of my collecting bodies for evil experiments began to circulate, and all the goodwill I had built up over the years evaporated in an instant. I was even chased by an angry mob as I rode through one town, and I had to convince my servants to unlock the gates of my castle to let me pass. Each day I would ride out to search for him, of carnage. I had hoped that I could convince him to return to the laboratory, where I could control him, but finding him was impossible. Each day, more peasants died, and the hatred of me increased. I think the only thing that saved my life was that I was perceived as the only person who might be able to stop him. One night, I returned to the castle after a fruitless day of searching, and returned to the lab to think. Much to my surprise, I found him lying on the operating table. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and tried speaking to me. "Why?" he asked. "Let me go back." I really didn't know what to say, but I explained that I thought I could help him if he would let me. I talked to him and tried to comfort him for several hours until I heard a roar from the outside. The noise started driving him mad. I looked out the window and saw hundreds of torch-wielding peasants surrounding the tower. He let out a roar and started flailing his arms at them in rage. "There it is! Kill him! Burn him!" They started throwing their torches through the windows, lighting the curtains and carpets instantly. I cried out for them to stop, but it was too late. My creation was running madly about the room, trying to escape the flames until I could see him no longer through the smoke. I managed to escape down a back stairwell and reached the stables unobserved, where I mounted a horse and escaped.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the wickedest of them all? Me, of course. Oh, that beautiful, deathly white complexion, those jagged yellow teeth, those blood-red lips, those blood-red eyes. A vision, a dream! Oh, joy! Another 7 years of bad luck.
Three weeks later, I boarded the ship Bavaria to go to New York. I had written Carl that I had sold off my assets and was coming to start a fresh life. Anna would come over as soon as I had established myself. Within days of setting sail, there were rumors of a killer on board. At first, a few members of the crew were reported missing. Then, a few broken door latches were reported. Finally, 2 men were found with their necks broken. I must have said something about the nature of the wounds looking familiar, because that immediately placed me under suspicion. After another week, 2 more men had disappeared, and a passenger was found badly mangled. There was much excitement on board, and a lot of anger directed at me, even though at the time I thought myself blameless. I awoke a few days later to find myself locked into my cabin. I pounded on the door to get someone to let me out, but couldn't get any response. Finally, after beating on the door for 2 hours, I was able to loosen it enough from its hinges to pull it loose. I found that the rest of the ship was empty, and the lifeboats gone. I suppose that the surviving passengers and crew decided to take their chances in the lifeboats than with whatever was killing them on board. I imagine I was left behind as they were in no mood to take any more chances. That night, as I sat alone in the dining salon, I heard footsteps on deck. I quickly ran onto the deck, only to run into him. The fire at the castle had badly scarred him, and he moved very slowly. What mental capacity he had seems to have been greatly diminished. He looked at me almost apologetically. "You take me with you. I have nowhere else to go." I didn't know what to say or do. I took him down to the dining salon and fed him. Even though he had the blood of 20 men on his hands, I felt responsible and sorry for him. He never would have existed without me, and he cannot survive in the world without me. We spent the last few weeks on the ship together in relative peace, as I think we both had resolved ourselves to our imminent deaths. He really didn't seem to know that the end was upon us until the ship struck and became fast in the polar ice pack. I explained as best I could that the ship was stuck and couldn't move until the ice released us, or crushed the hull and sank us. I told him we would probably starve or freeze to death before either of those happened. I think the idea that his actions led to my ultimate demise crushed him. He didn't speak for 2 days, and on the 3rd day, I came up on deck just in time to see him walking away across the frozen surface. He turned to look at the ship one last time, saw me, and called out, "I'm sorry." He turned and walked away. I never saw him again.
Where is Frankenstein? It's been so long since I've seen him. Maybe he is on the news and you hear about him all the time. Maybe he's where all missing children are. Maybe he's right behind you.
The Haunted Hitchhiker. A young woman returned to her hometown upon the death of her father. When she was a child, her mother had left her father and moved away after he had become an alcoholic and fallen into a severe depression. They barely had contact with him throughout her life. She received a call from her father's lawyer upon his passing, telling her that she had inherited his car. When she arrived at his dilapidated home, where he died alone, she went to the garage door, unlocked the padlock with the key her father's lawyer had provided, and opened it to find a beautiful red Dodge convertible in excellent condition. As she walked around the car, she found that the tires were original and not worn, and that there was only about 10,000 miles on the odometer. But there was an odd stain on the chrome of one of the fenders, and the young woman assumed it was just rust. The keys were in the ignition, and the car was filled with gas. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life. She pulled out of the driveway and took a drive around the town. At an intersection, near the elementary school, she pulled up to the stop sign. She saw a little girl standing at the curb, staring at her with sad and mournful eyes. The little girl was pale, dressed slightly out of fashion for children of her age, and holding a small doll. The young woman gave a pleasant smile and a wave, but the returned expression of the little girl caused her to go cold and the hairs stand on the back of her neck. Perplexed, the woman continued on. She looked back over her shoulder at the little girl, but she had disappeared. That night, the young woman was troubled with a fitful sleep. She dreamed she saw her father in front of her, with the same sad expression as the little girl she had seen earlier. She heard him cry out to her, as if in pain, "Help her!" And then she woke up. It was late, and she felt restless. Perhaps a drive would relax her. As she drove around the quiet town, she felt compelled to return to the intersection where she saw the little girl. Much to her surprise and amazement, the little girl was still there, under a streetlight, just waiting and holding her doll. The young woman pulled up to the car to the little girl. "What's wrong? Can I help you in any way?" "I'm lost. It's dark, and I can't find my way home," said the little girl. "I'll take you home if you tell me where you live," the young woman replied. The little girl climbed in the car and said her address. The young woman drove her home, where there was a solitary light shining in a second-floor window. "Can I walk you to the door?" the woman said. "No, I need to walk to the light by myself, but thank you very much for helping me." And for the first time, the little girl smiled. The next day, the young woman felt a lightness of being, as if a load had been lifted. She decided to check on the little girl and drove around to her house. There was an older woman in the yard tending the garden. "Excuse me, but how is your little girl today? Did she get in okay?" The woman looked up shocked. "What do you mean?" she said. "My little girl is dead. She was killed 20 years ago on her way home from school by a drunk driver in a red Dodge convertible, just like yours. They never found him or the car. And it's strange that you should ask about her, because last night I thought I was dreaming when I heard her come up the stairs as she used to. It's so good to be home, I thought I'd heard her say. And when I looked in her room in the morning, as I do every morning, her favorite doll was on the bed. That doll was buried with her when she died.
It's so good to be home. It's so good to be home. So good, so good to be so good to be good to be home. To be home. To be home. To be home.
Are you ready for bed now? I'm sure you'll sleep well, if you can sleep at all. I'll be around until dawn, and then Moldy and I will crawl into our crib for the day. But we'll be back when the sun goes down, appearing behind you as its last rays disappear, and the moon rises for another Fright Night.